Discover launches into deep space.
European Space Agency's automated transfer vehicle says goodbye to the International Space Station one last time.
Wow, and I interview Chris Newman about space law. Stay tuned. Tomorrow begins right now. And welcome to Tomorrow, episode 8.06 for Saturday, February 21st, 2015. My name is Benjamin Higginbotham. And before we start our episode this week, I'd like to give a huge shout out to all the patrons of Tomorrow who helped to make this specific episode happen. These are the people who have contributed at least $10 to this episode. And you can find out more information on how you can help crowdfund this show over at patreon.com/TMRO. All right, joining us this week, we're actually going to be talking to Dr. Chris Newman, and he is a reader in law at the University of Sunderland. And we got to talking on Twitter. This is how we brought Chris in. We got to talking on Twitter, and he seemed to be very passionate about space law. So I just wanted to talk to you about some of those things that you're really passionate, that are happening in space and in law. So first off, welcome to Tomorrow. And what are some of the cool things that happen with space and law?
Well, first of all, Benjamin, thanks so much for having me. Space law is one of those areas that at first sight, it doesn't seem to gel naturally. But actually, I prefer to think of it as sort of space governance, if you like. The relationship between law, space, humanity, it all works together. And so wherever there's human activity, there needs to be some sort of regulation. So it naturally got me thinking, how does this all work? And this was right at the start of my studies. And then I found out, actually, there was this whole body of space law that went back right to the start of the space race, to 1958, where the United Nations, seeing the launch of Sputnik, decided that actually this was going to be a thing. This was going to be a thing that was going to happen. It wasn't going away. So they started the Committee on the Peaceful Uses of Outer Space. And through that, they built up this body of law. They built up this body of normative behavior, if you like. And that's what started space law. It reached its crescendo, if you like, in 1967 with the Outer Space Treaty, the signing of the Outer Space Treaty, which is recognized as being, if you like, the central trunk of space law, the central trunk of things that regulates the way that we do business in space.
So let's go back to the very beginning. When Sputnik first launched, it kind of scared and frightened the world and also inspired the world. So what did it inspire from a law standpoint? What did they go, oh, these are some things we need to regulate?
The obvious thing, I mean, and I think the first thing that was in the uppermost in the minds of the people pulling together the law was security. It's been recognized, I think, that the Outer Space Treaty is, in essence, a security treaty. If you go on YouTube and have a look at the signing of the Outer Space Treaty, it's actually billed on the sort of the newsreel. It's billed as an anti-nuclear weapons treaty. So that was very much in the minds of the people who were drafting it, who were pulling it together. And I think, as well, I mean, I always say to my students, if you want to understand the law better, look at the year. That always helps. And one of the things that, if you look at the year 1967, the space race was in full swing. You had the race to the moon, which was by no means a foregone conclusion that we see it as now. We just had Gemini program. The Russians were full steam ahead, so it was by no means certain who was going to get there first. So very much in the mind of the people pulling together space law was actually, how do we stop space becoming, if you like, another battlefield? How do we stop it being another area of conflict? And so what they did was they pulled together this concept of the benefit of all mankind, space exploration being the benefit of all mankind. And it's very much an aspirational treaty, the Outer Space Treaty, but it very much sort of tries to embed the principles of non-militarization, of peaceful cooperation, of scientific exploration as well.
So you said, look at the year, and that will kind of help you determine how they created the law. So let's look at this year. Let's look at what the culture and government looks like right now. How do the space laws look today as compared to then?
I think we're in a fascinating period. I really do. I think we've got a situation evolving now that was never in the minds of people in 1967. In 1967, we had two big power blocks that were using space as a if you like, an area of expansion and as an area to showcase the strengths of their philosophies. they didn't think about private space flight. They didn't think about space tourism. They didn't think about colonizations of Mars. Those were all sort of science fiction at the time. What we've got now is we've very much got private actors in the space race. We've very much got Mars exploration in sort of like the zeitgeist at the minute. So what we have is a situation entirely alien, if you'll pardon the pun, to what the people who were designing space law in the 60s would even think of. And I think it's kind of instructive that the world has sort of moved on. The last big international space treaty, for example, was 1979, the Moon Agreement, and that received very, very lukewarm reception. Only a handful of states actually signed it. So I think we can say with a degree of confidence that at the minute we've moved away from the big showcasing international treaty, and what we've got now are multilateral and bilateral agreements with states. We've got, the United States making an agreement to work with India. We've got the European Space Agency all working together. So I think we're very much in a new era of space law, and one that's, I think, very low predictability. Where it's going to go, how it's going to develop, I think is very difficult to sort of quantify.
So we're in the infancy of humans going out into space. We haven't even been back to the moon in like 40 plus years. So when we do put humans on Mars, is any of that law that we're making right now going to matter? Or are they just going to kind of do whatever they want to do and say, whatever, it's our colony, we're just going to ignore you? So does any of this actually matter for future Martian colonies, or is it a building block? How does that all kind of tie together?
I think you're exactly right, Benjamin. I think it does tie together, because I think at the minute what we've got is if you like, various normative principles that everybody sort of accepts. It's accepted, for example, that we should try and keep space peaceful. It's accepted that there should be freedom for any nation to try and explore. I think in terms of international law and in terms of international space law, the big problem you always have is enforcement. So if a Martian colony does land there, how are we going to, on Earth, enforce the law that they try to put forward? I think that's going to be the great difficulty that we're going to see, enforcement. It's always been a problem with international law. It's always been a problem with international space law. And I think going forward, that's going to be the big issue, that if the Martian colonists decide, actually, we're not going to bother with any environmental stuff, our first job is to survive, what in reality are we going to be able to do about it?
So we actually had a question from our chat room. This is from Belsari, and he said, hasn't the Outer Space Treaty been broken several times? I know of at least 1 or 2 times by Russia.
Yeah, I mean, the thing is, again, the Outer Space Treaty is very much an aspirational document. It's very much a statement of aspiration. And in terms of breaking it, what we've got is a situation where it doesn't really have many norms to break. I mean, there's the prohibition in terms of nuclear weapons. There's the prohibition in terms of weapons of mass destruction in orbit. Now, we don't know that they've been broken. We assume they haven't, but there might have been. There's no way of actually finding that out. In terms of the anti-satellite tests and the satellite test that China, for example, did in 2007, they very much kind of go against the spirit of the Outer Space Treaty. And some lawyers have argued that they did in fact break the Outer Space Treaty. But what the Outer Space Treaty is, it's more like the ground rules, if you like, of space. There's no enforcement mechanism there, for example. What happens if there's no real details of how that would pan out. So while I accept that, the Outer Space Treaty, the spirit of it has been broken, there's actually, in terms of enforcement, there's nothing really that can be done about it anyway.
So going back, is that going to be, actually, let's talk about enforcement. There's nothing that can be done about it today, but as we grow out those cities and colonies on the moon, Mars, and beyond, they will become enforceable by the other colonies, because much like on Earth, we have different pockets of different people. Aren't we going to have other pockets that, some are honoring these outer space treaties and some aren't? And so isn't it just going to end up being a lot like what we have here on Earth, where some people are honoring, some of these worldwide kind of treaties and other people aren't?
Yes, I think that's exactly right. Unfortunately, what you've got, the way that we need to develop it is by consensus, and that's one of the problems that we have currently. For the past few years, they've been trying to get an international code of conduct for outer space activities off the ground. But that's been very much imposed from, if you like, the top down, from, space active nations, or actually from the European Union, which, hasn't been overly active. It's been more the European Space Agency, the two are separate bodies. And what you actually find is nations and people and companies don't like top-down imposition. They like to be consulted about it. And that's the way that space law and that's the way that space governance is going to work best, when it's a negotiated, accepted system of behavior.
So what about those countries and nations that don't sign these treaties? So Rhubarb Man, fun screen name, asks, can nations that didn't sign this treaty, for example, North Korea, break these laws? Since they didn't sign the treaty, are they actually breaking any laws per se, or does it work differently than that?
Now, what we're doing there is we're going really into quite hardcore issues of international law. But essentially, it can be argued that the Outer Space Treaty has fallen into what we call customary international law. Okay, so because it's been accepted by the major players in the space game, and because it's been treated as legally binding, there's a school of thought that says actually, it's slipped into what we call customary international law. And then we go back to the issue again of enforcement. What are we going to do about it? It's always this. It's the same issue that keeps coming back and coming back. If a rogue state decides to put a nuclear weapons platform in orbit, okay, clearly contrary to Article 4 of the Outer Space Treaty, which says that you're not allowed to do that. Okay, well, how are we going to deal with that? How are we actually going to manage that? Are we going to invade the country? Are we going to level sanctions? Are we going to try and blow the thing out of the sky? Those are the issues that we're faced with when trying to deal with issues of international law.
So for fun, when you said clearly in violation of Article 4 of the Space Treaty, I envisioned an episode of Doctor Who where the doctor's like, you are in violation of some, and then sci-fi treaty right there. That's exactly what that sounded like to me. All right, so enforcement, though, is an issue. It's no different in space, right? We have the exact same issues with any topic on the Earth or in the air, don't we? I mean, how do you enforce?
Certainly with international law we do.
Yeah,
absolutely. I mean, if you or I commit a crime, there's an enforcement mechanism, a very well-recognized enforcement mechanism that's going to come with flashing blue lights and put us in the back of the car, take us to the court, and we're then going to face the wrath of the courts, and then we're going to get sanctioned. That's what happens to us. That's why the vast majority of us don't commit crimes, because there is that enforcement mechanism there. In international law, it's a lot more subtle than that. There's a lot more nuance than that. It's in the realms of normative behavior and trying to coerce nations to act in a way that's responsible. And it's very difficult. You only have to look at environmental law and the issue regarding climate change. It's a vexatious problem.
So we had two questions come up on this next topic. The first one's from Adrian C., who says, can a person own property on the moon, on Mars, and so on, but can they legally do it? And we also had asked Citizen Kane, much more succinctly said, property, question mark?
Yes. Property is the big question mark. That's exactly right. There is no sort of regime in place at the minute to deal with extraterrestrial property rights. The Outer Space Treaty, as it stands, puts an absolute prohibition on ownerships, but it's ownerships by state. It's, if you like, Article 2 of the Outer Space Treaty makes it there will be no appropriation by claims of sovereignty, by claims of occupation. So, at first sight, that would seem to be quite clear. And yet, in England, for example, no one claims absolute ownership of the land. They're always ownership subject to sovereignty. So what we've got is a situation, again, we're talking very much in abstract. Now, we had the claims, the claims that got the company that sold bits of the moon off, and you could own an acre of the moon. And that was held not to be legal. But the way that they enforced their legality was by going to court, and going to court in a country being sovereign. So it almost becomes a circular argument and a circular discussion. What we need is to see how it's going to manifest itself in practice. Once we get the practical measures occurring, then we can start to regulate it. I think the problem we've got, and I think one of the reasons why the Moon Treaty was so unsuccessful, was it tried to speculate, and it tried to look forward as to, well, what might happen. If we'd have, if we'd have had a crystal ball in 1995, would we have got space activity occurring like it is in 2015? I'm not entirely sure we would. And that's the problem that legislators face. In many ways, the Outer Space Treaty is an amazing piece of drafting because it does kind of look forward in a prospective way. It does say, well, let's keep space, as non-militaristic as we can. Let's try and keep nuclear weapons out of there. Let's try and keep weapons of mass destruction. It kind of pays lip service to environmentalism, but it doesn't really. Article 9 is the environmental provision, and that doesn't really, do what we would expect an environmental provision to do now. So in a way, we sort of have to see how this is going to pan out. We have to see how the mining is going to occur. We have to see how property rights are going to develop.
In your opinion, as time goes on in the next decade, 2, 3, 4, 5 decades, will the Outer Space Treaty hold up over time?
What I can say is it's held up so far. It's held up so far in the face of commercial activity. It's held up so far in the breakup of the actual Soviet Union and the going from a binary system to a multi-state system. So it's held up so far. The big challenge, and I think the challenge that it really does face, is when commercial activity really starts to develop and really gets going and mining gets going, and then we're going to see how it's going to develop. I think what I always say to my students is where we are with space law now is where we were with law and the internet maybe 20, 25 years ago. There are so many different problems, so many issues that occur that we can't predict. We're in an era of very low predictability, and things are happening and things are changing so quickly that it is actually quite difficult to predict. So I think what the Outer Space Treaty does is it establishes a base level of performance, a base level of behaviour. And from that, what we're going to retain and what we're going to lose is anybody's guess.
Are there negative sides to it as well? Like, you likened it to the internet kind of 20 years ago, where we needed there not to be a lot of regulation on the internet because it was a new thing and we didn't know. And if you regulate it that early on, it will just die. So you have to wait for it to kind of flush itself out. Same thing with space, although on a much grander time scale. So could this be too early and because of that add too much regulation to outer space, which they could then force us to not explore, not go out there?
Interestingly enough, that's one of the issues that we face here in the UK. Our Outer Space Act, the Outer Space Act 1986, which was introduced to kind of fulfill our responsibilities under the Outer Space Treaty, it imposes terrific regulation and licensing requirements on companies that are looking to develop and looking to get into the space industry. Now, that one of the criticisms that's been severely levelled at the Outer Space Act is that it has done just that. It has limited the way in which British space exploration can occur. Now, that's not entirely fair. We're in a state of a quite rapid expansion in the UK, and I think there's been a lot of policy issues behind not getting involved with that as well. But it's one of those intangible sort of interrelated things that sure our regulation hasn't helped us. So I think there's a lot of truth in that, but I think there's a number of factors as well that inhibited us. In addition to that.
We could clearly go on for days about this topic. You're obviously very passionate about space law, and you make it a topic that would normally sound painfully boring quite interesting and fascinating to listen about, because these aren't like boring, just little things of, oh, well, so-and-so widget X and Y. This is the future expansion of humanity into the cosmos, and just kind of these broad overstrokes of how are we going to do this in a good way. And I think that's what makes it interesting as opposed to some of those little nitty-gritty things. Where can people find more information about you and continue this conversation online and get excited and passionate about what would normally be a boring topic?
Well, I'm glad you think I make it sound interesting. It is an area that I've really tried to develop. I'm one of many space lawyers out there. There's a great network out there. I'm a member of the International Institute of Space Law. There's the European Centre for Space Law. We've got a really vibrant network, I will say, on Twitter, talking to some great American space lawyers, people like Michael Listener out there, who are doing some great work looking at the very sort of outer edges of legality and policy and ethics and all of these things in a sort of a big soup. Because as I said, to sort of return to the point right at the start, to just talk about space law, I think, is a little unfair, because we're talking about governance, we're talking about the management of space. And for everybody out there watching who wants to get involved in space, but for whatever reason, don't see numbers and aren't technically minded, I think this is a great avenue. This is a great area to get involved in, because we really do. We need to think about these big ethical, philosophical, policy questions as to what type of exploration we're going to do, what type of activity we're going to do. I'm available at the University of Sunderland. If you go onto University of Sunderland website, have a look at my bio there, have a look at my page there. My email address and contact details are there. I'm also available, again, as you said right at the start, I'm also available on Twitter at Chris Newman 1972, and I think it's a great way to get involved. It's a great way to interact. It's brought me right within this melting pot of space policy people, of space law people as well, and I've got a couple of publications coming out in the next few months. So it's an exciting time to be involved. It's an exciting time to be looking at it, because I think we're right at the start of the journey. Yes, there's been 50 years of space law, but we're actually really at the start of Space Law 2.0.
I think we're at the start of Humanity 2.0, of us going out into space and exploring the cosmos, and with it, everything that goes with that, space law being one of those things. Chris, thank you so much for taking time out of your Saturday to join us live and talk about space law and the topic that you're very passionate about. We're going to have people leaving comments on YouTube, on Twitter, Facebook. Hopefully you'll be able to help answer some of those comments as they come up. There's so much stuff in the chat room I wasn't able to get to, but yeah, it was absolutely fascinating. Thank you so much for your time.
Thanks so much, Benjamin. A great show. Really enjoy it.
All right, we're going to take a quick break, and when we come back, we're going to be talking about space news. Stay with us. We'll be right back.
Look into her face, determination in her eyes. She won't give up or quit or fall for little fashion lies. Filled with awesome expectation, this girl's a fascination. Nothing in her way will keep her from her destination, 'cause she's fire walking, she's fire walking. When it's hot, she keeps on moving, through the heat keeps on improving. Yeah, she's fire walking, she's fire walking to be free.
And welcome back to Tomorrow. I'm now joined by my beautiful co-host, Carrie Ann, and we'll be talking about space news in just a moment. But before we do, I wanted to give a huge shout out to all of our patrons of Tomorrow. These are the people who have contributed $5 or more to this specific episode. You can find out more about how you can help crowdfund this show, because we are a crowdfunded show. We're driven by the community over at patreon.com/TMRO. Now, last week we put off our SpaceX news so we could bring Space Mike in and have him take care of that. So, Space Mike, take it away.
Hello, everybody. So some really cool things have been happening over these past 2 weeks. First of all, SpaceX successfully launched a Falcon 9 rocket on Wednesday, February 11th, launching the Discover satellite for the NOAA. And with the Discover satellite, that was very cool. And first of all, let's watch a little bit of launch footage.
1, 0. Liftoff of the Falcon 9. Falcon 9 at 0 towers. Please set warning space to flight. Warning this. GCO has moved to section F 65.
I don't know about you, but I've always been partial to launches at twilight. It's a beautiful time. This mission was completely successful, and it was a first for SpaceX because the Discover satellite is actually the Deep Space Climate Observatory. And what that means is that the satellite is going to be placed in the L1 Sun-Earth Lagrange point and will enter into a halo orbit there. And the purpose of the satellite is to monitor the sun and to give us advanced warnings whenever any sort of coronal mass ejections are heading our way. And they're going to be able to give us an advanced warning of about an hour, which as of right now is about 4 times more than what our current sun-watching satellites are able to warn us about. So that way we can power down or put into standby modes communication satellites so that we don't have some sort of catastrophic collapse of the internet in our entire system. So that's very cool. And with this satellite, it was proposed about 17 years ago by Al Gore, and lots of delays has happened, but it's very, very awesome that we're finally going to be able to launch this satellite, or it has been launched, and it's currently on its way to the L1 Lagrange point right now. It's going to take about 110 days in order to get there, but the information alone that it will be able to provide us of being able to observe all the coronal mass ejections as well as all the radiation coming from the sun is a benefit in and of itself. It has, right now it's planned to operate for 2 years, although it does have fuel for 5 years. So that's going to be a very good system to have. We also have this very awesome footage right here of the separation of the first stage. And just watch. This is from the Universal Camera Site 23.
Standing by for the burn now in 4, 3, 2, 1.
You can see the reaction control engines pushing away the first stage. And from right here, we can see the payload fairing. Oh, beautiful. So this was a very, very cool launch. This is a view of the first stage separation and the payload fairings that, to my memory, we haven't ever really gotten to be able to see before. So to be able to have such good footage of that is very cool. So everything about this mission was very successful. They did plan on doing a first stage landing attempt on the automated drone ship out in the Atlantic. However, the weather was too bad and the waves were just too strong. And so what they did is a controlled descent out into the open ocean, which was completely successful. They reached their target area of about 33 meters, and it was completely successful for that. So had the weather been better, they would have been able to actually land that.
All right, awesome. Thank you, Mike. We have additional launch coverage as well. We've got a progress launch that happened on Tuesday, February 17th at 11 o'clock Universal Time. Check it out.
We have main engine start. Turbo pumps up to flight speed. 3, 2, 1. Ignition and liftoff. Liftoff of the Progress 58 cargo ship on a fast-track flight to the International Space Station.
So that fast-track flight means that it was able to deliver 3.1 tons of cargo in 5 hours and 57 minutes. So just under 6 hours after this lifted off, it was docking with the International Space Station, which happened at 16:57 Coordinated Universal Time. And like I said, it was a fast-track rendezvous, and that happened at the Baikonur Cosmodrome in
Kazakhstan?
Kazakhstan, thank you. I was like, Kazakhstan. So you saw a sneak peek of another thing that's coming up. What did we just see a sneak peek of?
So European Space Agency's, I'm going to get this wrong, is the Automated Transfer Vehicle said its final goodbye to the International Space Station. There's only been 5 of them. This one in particular has been called the Georges Lemaitre, which I'm sure I completely...
I wouldn't even be able to get that far.
Completely butchered. It is beautiful. So very cool. So this is the, like I said, the automated transfer vehicle from European Space Agency, and it had its final undocking and re-entry from the International Space Station on Valentine's Day and came back to Earth the day after. It's only 5 of them have been launched in 2008, 2011, 12, 13, and 14, with a cumulative total time docked of 776 days. Not only did it bring supplies to the International Space Station, but it's also been testing next-generation laser navigation, or laser navigation sensors that can be used for future missions to help possibly clean up space junk and or dock with an asteroid. And it's some of the coolest footage ever.
Yeah, that is absolutely gorgeous. In addition to ATV leaving the International Space Station for the last time, that's a little bit sad, we'll never have another ATV again. Dragon, Space Mike, tell us about Dragon.
Well, the Dragon capsule that was launched for the CRS-5 mission has also unberthed from the space station and returned to Earth. And something that's really cool about the Dragon is right now it is the only vehicle out of all the international partners that can actually return cargo safely back to Earth. There's limited cargo that they can return on the Soyuz, but the Dragon is where they can actually return lots of science experiments, which they did return on this particular capsule. And with this one, there was lots of tests and experiments that they wanted to be able to return. Here's a cool shot of it actually returning and splashing down into the ocean. And with this mission, there was also a faulty spacesuit that almost killed the Italian astronaut Pomerento a while back. And that is going to be repaired, refurbished, and relaunched on a future mission to return that spacesuit to the International Space Station stock. Here is also another beautiful shot of the Dragon capsule on the return cargo ship, and also at twilight, and just a beautiful shot. So very cool that the Dragon was able to return safely, return those experiments, and not only was there science experiments, but they also returned several of the 3D printed parts that they've been experimenting with. So that's very cool, and I for one am very happy that we have this capability with SpaceX's Dragon capsule to be able to return very important science experiments and faulty hardware that we can reuse and return instead of just throwing it away.
And yay, made in space. That's really awesome. I'm excited for all the 3D printing stuff that they're doing up there. So Mars One had made an announcement, and they're talking about how they've got 100 candidates. They've narrowed it down from 202,586 initial applicants down to just 100. They're that nonprofit Dutch organization that is looking to send humans on a one-way trip to Mars. Of those 100 applicants, 50 are men and 50 are women. Those are broken down: 39 from America, 31 from Europe, 16 from Asia, 7 from Africa, and 7 from Oceania. And if you were not selected, so you were part of that other 200 and however many thousand people that did not get selected in the final 100, you will have the opportunity to apply later this year in 2015 when there's a new application round that will open up. Now, they didn't say, but I assume that anyone can apply when this new application round opens up. So if you've been listening to Mars One, you've been excited about what they're doing, but you missed the initial application round, you'll have an opportunity to apply again. I believe you'll have an opportunity to apply in 2015. Now, we've got this broken down to 100 applicants, and what you're watching are, we took a part of their video that was really, really fast and whipped through these really fast and slowed it down so you could actually see the 100 applicants that they had in the video. So those should be the screenshots, we assume, of the 100 applicants. They could, of course, just be 100 random faces as well. We don't know.
Facebook for faces. That would be awesome.
We don't know. But the next round of culling is going to bring that down to 24. So from 200 and 2,586 down to 100, down to 24. So there you go.
Wow.
Yep.
So speaking of Mars One doing some culling, that's a transition I'm going with.
Yeah. Now, by the way, the topic, this comes from a Space News article, and the Space News article title was Mars One Suspends Work on Robotic Missions. But I don't think that's a fair title.
So this is what happened. In 2013, Mars One made the announcement that in 2018 they wanted to put up two robotic missions to a certain extent. One was going to be a lander, and one was going to be a satellite communications relay for the most part. And the lander was just going to test out some technology before the humans arrive. Is really what it comes down to. Lockheed Martin and Surrey Satellite Technology Limited both won awards from Mars One to do concept studies. They both have completed their studies. In fact, Surrey Satellite Technology delivered their study to Mars One February 16th of 2014. So an entire year ago, and no one has heard anything about them since. Between here and there was, you probably remember us speaking about it, there was an MIT or, that Massachusetts Institute of Technology, a study that basically suggested that astronauts that would land on Mars, even if they did via Mars One, that the technology that has been presented so far would pretty much have them all dying within months of getting there.
Right.
And that was kind of a big blow. So since then, magically, Mars One has kind of made sure that they've really shifted their focus to really more look at life-sustaining technology. And they've done so with the help of Paragon Space Development Corp., which is out of Tucson, Arizona. And their particular study, Space Mike is all excited about Tucson, that particular study coming from Paragon Space Development Corp. should be released this March, so a couple of weeks away or so.
So I don't think the Space News article title was fair, because they
did say suspend work, and they have, to a certain extent, suspended work. The thing to note, I think this is your point of contention, is that you're right. We don't know what their timetable initially looked like. However, if you're asking for concept studies and you've gotten them within a year, and you have said that you're trying to launch in 2018, it is now 2015, and you don't have a thing yet? You only have concept studies? You don't even have a paper thing to kind of maybe make into metal one day.
Okay.
You only have 3 years, man.
But it's based, the video we showed, that animation is not theirs, it's the Phoenix lander. That's the same platform that they're going to design it after.
Well, that's that for the lander, right?
For the
Because that's
lander.
what Lockheed Martin has said, that a lot of their technology is being based off of the I don't want to say legacy, but the NASA stuff that they did with the Phoenix lander.
Right. So, a lot of that's, I don't want to say done, but we've done that before, so
Sure.
it shouldn't take as long to build it again. So,
Sure.
look, they're going to have to bite the bullet soon if they want to make it by 2018.
Yes.
But soon doesn't mean that they've passed the point of no return.
No.
It just means they need to do it soon.
Well, that's why it says suspends and not cancels.
But, okay. I guess I take issue with
It is a slight sensational headline. I will
Yeah.
give you that much. However, it's
I'm not saying that they're
completely untrue. Is all.
Look, I'm skeptical of Mars One. Everyone knows that, but
Yes.
I don't think that we need to be overly sensational. I don't know.
Agreed. I agreed. But again,
HAL
this,
9000, Mars One by 2068.
this conversation would be very boring if you just said, "Well, I think that's blown way out of proportion." I said, "Yes, it is." Next. So there you go.
All right. Space Mike, let's end on you. We're fighting, so Space Mike, it's up to you. Tell us about Slick 13.
I don't like it when
One of you guys always has to play devil's advocate. I love it. Oh, man. So in the final SpaceX news, it is now official that SpaceX has leased Space Launch Complex, or Slick 13, for landings of their first stages and possibly second stages and even Dragon capsules. Here's a real-life shot of what Space Launch Complex 13 looks like right now. And this site was used back in the day to launch the original Atlas rockets as well as the Atlas Agena rockets. And the launch tower and the control bunker has since been demolished to make way for new customers, or in this case, SpaceX, who's leasing the place. And what they're planning on doing is, you can't really see it from this shot, but what they're planning on doing is to have 5 main pads. There's going to be 1 central main pad and then 4 contingency pads. And when we talked about this a couple episodes ago, I mistakenly said that they would be launching landing all of their stages of the Falcon 9 and Falcon 9 Heavy on the main and contingency pads, as well as possibly the second stage and Dragon capsules. However, with the official documents being released, they're not actually planning that for the 5-year lease that is that they have agreed to. And with this, they would use the main pad, of course, for all the main landings, and the contingency pads would just be backups, or if there's any sort of problems and they need to do some sort of emergency landing attempt or something like that. And there's lots of other details about this that raise a couple of questions, such as whether or not they would need to do some sort of self-destruct capability for when they come in for a landing. However, the Air Force is not going to allow SpaceX to launch or to land anything there. I keep saying launching, excuse me. They're not going to allow them to land anything there until they have proven their capability with the automated drone ship out in the Atlantic. And once they've done several more soft touchdowns and are able to recover several first stages, then I'm sure that the licensing and red tape will be gotten through in order to be able to start landing at this site. And something also to note is that SpaceX is also in talks with the Air Force of using one of the space launch complexes at Vandenberg Air Force Base. They're looking at Space Launch Complex 4 West, which is nearby to where they're going to be launching the Falcon Heavy at Vandenberg anyway. That is not official yet, and if it is, they haven't released anything publicly about that sort of agreement, but this is hopefully will work out that they will have 2 landing sites, both at Cape Canaveral and Vandenberg, to be able to land first stages and hopefully in the future second stages and Dragons, but as of right now, that is not officially in the works.
All right, Space Mike, thank you so much for your analysis on all the SpaceX stuff. We're going to take a quick break. When we come back, comments from our last week's show. Stay with us. We'll be right back. And welcome back to the show. Now, before we get into comments from our last week's show, I did want to give a huge shout out to all of our patrons of tomorrow who helped to make this episode happen. These are the people who've contributed $2.50 or more. These are our Patreon Plus subscribers, and will have access to our After Dark episode as soon as it is made available online. And there are more. We've brought it down. You can spend just 1 penny per episode to help us out. Those are our Patreon subscribers. These are the people who contribute between 1 penny and $2 and 49 cents. I said 99 last week, but it's $2.49. And so any amount helps this show. And if you want to get your name in the show, and if you want to get some of the perks, just help us out over at patreon.com/TMRO. We are a crowd-funded show. Every single dollar helps, so you help keep us on the air and doing the show week after week. All right, let's go ahead and get started with some comments from our last week's show. First up,
Chris Ratcliffe.
You said that angrily. What the heck?
What?
What?
There's really no surprise there, honestly. So Chris said, forward crazy idea. Toward Martian Cities Unconference. You know what's spot in Anaheim for summer 2015?
I do. So I have already contacted Disneyland Resort to see what the price of that will be. And they're they don't like to just kind of say, hey, here's the price. So if it is a reasonable number, tomorrow we'll pay for the venue to get people there. So now the question is, how many of you would be interested to go to a Martian Unconference? An unconference about Mars. I think we'll just open it up, not just Martian cities, but I think all of humanity's going to Mars. That's our unconference.
My whole life is an unconference, by the way.
Our whole life is an unconference. Are you interested? Let us know in the comments anywhere you want so we can get a rough idea as to how many people would actually go. And then I was thinking sometime late part of this year, possibly. So, and then who would any of you be willing to help? So we would hold it at the Disneyland Resort. You wouldn't need a ticket to the park. You just need to show up. If you're out of town and want to show up, you could stay at the Disneyland Resort. But the great thing about doing it over there is there are a ton of hotels within spitting distance of Disneyland. So pick whatever you want. Come on in, and there's a ton of transportation system over there as well. So that's why it felt like a really good place to do it. In the future, I'm hoping that our Patreon campaigns become large enough where we can have our own studio. I'm trying to find a space that we can actually carve into sections so we can have space up unconferences and then future kind of Martian type of unconferences as well. And then you could even come and watch a live taping of the show. Taping, we don't use tape, I don't know. Live hard driving of the show? I don't know what phrase to use. It's actually not even a hard drive, it's a solid state drive. All right, so a live solid stating of the show you could attend in person. That's the plan, but we need to get approximately double to triple where we're at right now. Very achievable in 2015, 2016. All right, let's go ahead and move on to the next one.
All right, this one comes from Novateco, also from Twitter.
Kind of a cool sounding name.
Novateco.
Yeah.
For underground, a large common area with high-intensity light sources to simulate sunlight. Caverns have windows to common areas.
Yeah, so we're talking about Martian cities and what it would kind of look like, and you need to simulate sunlight underground. And you actually found that there was that skylight.
That came from DJ Flux, actually. So I have to definitely hat tip to
Wiki,
DJ Flux.
DJ.
Yes, where there are these lights that look like skylights. But you can put them in any room that doesn't actually have any natural light. And the light that gets emitted from it can actually trick not just your naked eye, but also a camera, which is just incredible. They're ridiculously expensive.
It looks like
It
does. It looks like sunlight, and they scatter the light in such a way, the same way that sun would get scattered through.
Yeah,
so it does actually. I saw pictures of it, and if they didn't tell me that it was a light fixture, I would have assumed it was a skylight.
Which would be brilliant for that.
I haven't seen it in person, but that seems like it'd be kind of cool.
Yeah.
So yeah, absolutely. Artificial light and making sure that the human psyche and body and kind of for underground stuff. I think we can do enclosed spaces that are open and big, and they don't have to be like little tunnels or anything.
Right.
I think even going back to Chris Ratcliffe, he talked about you can do pretty good architecture that would look large and open and spacious, but still kind of be underground.
Yeah.
All right, moving along.
U5KO, also from Twitter, it looks like, says underground makes sense on Mars, but people need sunlight to function normally. I suggest earth scrapers.
Yeah, so I didn't know what earth scrapers were, so Google that if you're interested. And actually, humanity has done that before, where you basically just kind of go down and kind of do, it's an inverse of a skyscraper, right? It's actually kind of neat. And my best suggestion is Google earth scrapers and see what pops up and do. Yeah, it is really kind of cool. So absolutely. All right, moving on.
Bill Hughesley says, survival on Mars, same as the moon, except harder to get to, land, leave, and resupply. So maybe moon today and Mars tomorrow.
Dave Maston would be proud. Moon first, the moon first. You know, we should ask him if you can buy those moon first shirts. Does the community of tomorrow want access to those moon first shirts? What kind of swag does the community of tomorrow want access to? Moon first. You probably want. Okay.
I've already got one on order.
Do you really?
Yes, I do.
Wait. Where can you get it, Dada?
What's his name? Eric.
Yeah.
We used to work with Virgin, I think.
I think so.
Yeah, he's got them made, and he's gonna bring them down the next time he visits.
Yeah.
So basically, what you're saying is no one else can order them online.
Right, you
It's-
gotta
Exactly.
know a guy. We'll work on it. We'll
me,
work on it.
Me first.
you know, actually,
But I love, I mean, you see the hashtag, right? So moon first, Mars, hashtag tomorrow.
Yeah, yeah.
Because that would be cute for us.
Yeah. So
Saying.
hashtag moon today, hashtag Mars, hashtag tomorrow.
Yeah.
I wish I could show you, but whatever. You get the idea. So that would be a great shirt. So speaking of, we're actually very close to our next page. I feel like I'm just pimping Patreon this show. I'm sorry, guys, but you know it's relevant, so I'm going to. We're very close to our next Patreon goal, which is in fact a swag store.
Mm-hmm.
So a hashtag moon first,
Mm-hmm.
hashtag Mars, hashtag tomorrow
Mm-hmm.
would actually be kind of a fun shirt. I think. All right. Okay. Moving on.
And the opposite opinion would be hashtag Mars today, hashtag Mars tomorrow.
Yeah. That'd be.
Thinking of what, you know.
Swag store people. We need to make it. It's $1,000 per episode, and we get the swag store. We're at like $920 or so
Something
last
like
I
that.
checked. So we're very close. Just a few more people contributing, and we can get to that swag store. So I think within the next month or two, if you guys, if you just help contribute to the show, we could get there.
Well, we'll totally take your suggestions.
All right, go ahead. Moving
All
on.
right, so from YouTube, Real Coder says, tomorrow, love your shows, but I personally think you should be more international. By looking at your new intro, it does have Mir Space Station on, or New Russia spacecraft. I know you do cover international stuff too, but I would like to see you guys do a little less US-centric.
Yeah, so, you know, our argument has always been when we're not US-centric, really. It's just that that's where a lot of space stuff happens.
We have a lot of access to a lot of that information as well.
Correct. A lot of other countries like China, they just don't give you access to the information, so we don't know. We have no good method. Use our Reddit channel, reddit.com/r/TMRO, and that will give us, leave information there. We peruse that before every show for information on what's going on, and absolutely we'll put the European space news or any other space news from around the world into the show. We do try to cover all of that. The argument for the open does make sense, although it is just a lift of the old open, and that's a lot of new space companies, and most new space companies are in the US.
Right.
I think the sole exception is Skylon, really. Well, no, we've got Rocket Labs. Rocket Labs is not in the U.S.
Yeah.
I can't really think of. Copenhagen.
Firefly.
Firefly's U.S. based.
They were started off in Australia.
Well, then one of them is in Texas. Anyhow.
Firefly just moved to Texas. Yeah, anyway.
Anyhow, a lot of them are U.S. based, and that's why you see a lot of U.S.-centric stuff in the open. We'll try to fix that, but the best way to fix that isn't with us. It's for the rest of the world to do some cool space stuff. And make it big, neat, and interesting so that it's not all U.S.-centric. So that sounds a little pretentious, but that's not how I mean it.
It does, but you know, this is where we live, this is where we have the most information, and it's where some of the most exciting stuff is coming out of. And so that's...
So step it up, rest of the planet. All right, moving on.
I apologize. Also from YouTube, this one comes from Stephen Thompson. For the foreseeable future, Martian outposts will be like elaborate Antarctic bases. You could have 10,000 people on Mars, but not have more than 500 in one spot. In the decades, at least, it'll take to build up an infrastructure to support a population that will all need cities. There's no telling what technological advances there will be. A city powered mostly by solar looks different than a city powered mostly by fusion.
Yes. Next. I agree. Right? I mean,
it was worded very well.
Yeah.
I hopefully didn't butcher it too badly. Also from YouTube, this one comes from Sandforce. I think the number one limiting factor for any off-world base right now is the life support systems. They are nowhere near where they need to be for a long-term mission that is far away from Earth resupply. We need to learn how to print 95% of the circuitry, metals, and plastics required for one of these systems before we can ever comfortably live somewhere else. This topic needs more attention.
Yep. Actually, sorry. I agree to the point where we contacted Made in Space again, and we're going to be bringing them on the show, I think, sometime. Hopefully, we don't have the exact date down,
yet,
but we're hoping to bring them on sometime in March. So, and Made in Space does 3D printing. They're kind of the pioneers in the 3D printing world. They're the ones who are helping to. You look at what we're going to need to go to Mars, and this is one of those like kind of critical things that we're going to need to survive off-world, and they're one of the only companies doing it. So we're absolutely going to be bringing them back on to talk about what they're doing, because they've got a lot of exciting stuff going on at the space station right now, actually going up and coming back down from space station so they can do additional testing. So we completely agree with you on that one. All right, that was our show for this week. I'd like to thank everyone so much for watching. We've got another great live show coming up next week, so stay tuned to Saturdays at 2100 Universal Time. Otherwise, for those of you watching After Dark's up next, or if you're a Patreon Plus subscriber, you should be available to see that on the YouTube After Dark channel. Thank you so much for watching. See you next week.